So imagine you just finished this grueling 4-year degree. You got straight A's, you're graduating at the top of your class, and you finally hand your pristine diploma to a recruiter.
Right. The moment of truth.
Exactly. But the recruiter just looks at it and says, this is completely worthless to me because this piece of paper doesn't list a single thing you actually know how to do.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is a terrifying scenario for a student,
Yeah.
but honestly, it's becoming an increasingly common reality for employers all over the world right now.
It really is. And that exact friction is what's driving this massive global rewiring of the classroom.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
So, welcome to another professional discussion hosted by Research Union Insights. Today, we are exploring a fundamental transition in the educational world. We're looking at the shift away from traditional content delivery education towards something called outcome-based education, or OBE for short.
And we should clarify, this isn't just like a minor curriculum update.
No, not at all.
We are talking about fundamentally dismantling the way human beings have been graded and evaluated for, well, basically the last century.
It's massive. So our mission for this deep dive today is to really unpack this. We need to look at the macroeconomic panic driving this shift and the intense practical logistics of how institutions are tracking this on the ground.
Right. And we also need to get into the fierce scholarly critiques out there, because there are some serious warnings about the dark side of standardizing human intellect.
For sure. And to do this, we are drawing on a really great stack of diverse sources today. We've got institutional insights from tech platforms like Digi and Mastersoft.
Yeah. And we're also pulling from modern educational frameworks from 21K School, plus a real-world case study from St. Anne's College for Women.
Oh, and we can't forget the vital, historically grounded critique from the Rethinking Schools Journal. So, a lot to cover.
Definitely. And, to really grasp the magnitude of this change, we first have to isolate the mechanical failure of the old system.
Right. Why are we throwing the old way out?
Exactly. So the traditional educational model is what our sources call teacher-centric and time-bound.
Okay.
The defining metric is essentially endurance. You sit in a chair for a 16-week semester, the teacher broadcasts the curriculum at you, and then you take a test.
Endurance. I actually love that phrasing because it highlights how much the traditional system resembles a factory assembly line.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, the conveyor belt just moves at the exact same speed for everyone. Week 3 becomes week 4, regardless of whether the product, the student's actual understanding is fully assembled.
Yeah, and then you get graded on a curve, which is, frankly, perhaps the most flawed metric of all.
Wait, why is grading on a curve so flawed in this context?
Well, because grading on a curve simply scores you relative to the people sitting right next to you.
Right.
So if everyone in the room failed to grasp the core concepts, but you failed just a little bit less than the rest of them, congratulations, you get an A.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that tells an employer absolutely nothing about your objective capability.
Exactly. And that's where outcome-based education comes in. It completely flips that dynamic. OBE is student-centric and mastery-bound.
Mastery-bound.
Right. Doesn't care how many hours you sat in the lecture hall. It only cares about what you can physically demonstrate and apply in the real world by the time the module ends.
Which makes sense. But the motivation for tearing down the old system and building this new one, it really comes down to stark economic survival, doesn't it?
It does. When you look at the macroeconomic reality, it's pretty alarming. For instance, the Didi source points out that India's youth unemployment rate hit 35.8% in June of 2022.
35.8%. That is wild.
Right. So you start to see the panic from institutions.
Yeah, over a third of young people out of work. That isn't just a fluctuating market, that is a structural gap.
Precisely. Industry leaders are looking at these recent graduates and realizing there's this massive chasm between a student's ability to cram for a multiple choice test and their actual ability to execute practical skills.
Because modern organizations just can't afford to hire people with degrees who still require ground-up training to do basic tasks.
Exactly.
Let's ground this in a specific example from the Mastersoft source material. They outline this scenario with a student named Jenny.
Oh, right, the Jenny example.
Yeah. So in the traditional time-bound system, Jenny gets a B in her geometry class. But, what does a B actually mean?
It's totally ambiguous.
Right. Maybe she's brilliant, but just doesn't test well. Or maybe she barely understood the material, but the curve saved her.
But under an OBE framework, that arbitrary letter grade is completely abolished. Instead, Jenny's outcome report states a verifiable competency.
Like what?
It would say something like, Jenny can successfully apply the Pythagoras theorem to calculate load-bearing angles, or that she answered 90% of Pythagoras questions correctly.
I see. It's almost like a video game progression system.
How do you mean?
Well, you don't get to casually walk into level 2 just because you spent 40 hours wandering around level 1.
Oh, I like that.
You only advance when you actually defeat the boss and prove you've mastered the mechanics of that specific stage.
That is a perfect analogy. And when a curriculum demands that level of proof, it inherently forces students out of passive rote memorization.
Right, they have to move into active problem solving.
Exactly. The assessment is no longer repeat this fact, it becomes demonstrate this skill.
Okay, I follow the logic, and on paper, it sounds flawless. But logistically speaking, if employers are demanding proof of actual skills, and we are replacing a simple letter grade with hundreds of highly specific, granular competencies for every single student.
Yeah, the data load.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does an entire university actually measure that without collapsing? I mean, if a professor has 300 students, they cannot sit down and write a custom paragraph evaluating the life skills of every single one of them.
That is the exact friction point. And it introduces us to the complex architecture required to make OBE function.
The alphabet soup of metrics, right?
Basically, yeah, it's a highly structured hierarchy of metrics, and it all maps back to Bloom's taxonomy.
Bloom's taxonomy. For you listening who might be a little rusty on educational theory, that's the pyramid of cognitive learning.
Right, starting at the bottom.
Yeah, it starts at the bottom with basic knowledge, just remembering facts. Then it moves up through comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and finally, evaluation at the peak.
Exactly. So OBE utilizes that pyramid to create a chain of targeted outcomes. At the very top of this chain, you have PEOs.
Which stands for?
Program Educational Objectives. These are the broad, ambitious goals of what a graduate should be achieving in their career 4 to 5 years after they leave the university.
Wait, stop right there. They are tracking alumni success as a baseline metric for the current curriculum.
They absolutely have to. If the whole goal is employability, you have to verify if the alumni are actually employed and utilizing the skills you taught them.
That is fascinating. Okay, so what is beneath the PEO?
One step down, you have POs, or program outcomes, as well as graduate attributes.
And what are those?
Those are the specific skills, knowledge, and attitudes the student must possess on the exact day of graduation.
Okay, so to use an example, if the long-term PEO is, say, lead engineering projects ethically in the workforce, the graduation day PO would be design a complex structural component.
That's a perfect illustration, yeah. And beneath that, at the foundational level, you have COs.
Course outcomes.
Right, course outcomes. These are the highly specific skills learned by the end of a single individual class, or even like a single Tuesday morning lecture.
So returning to the engineering example, the CO might be calculate shear stress in a steel beam.
Exactly. And this whole chain is what they call constructive alignment.
Meaning everything has to connect perfectly.
Yeah, the professor can't just teach whatever they find interesting that day. They have to prove that Tuesday's lecture on calculating shear stress directly fulfills the course outcome.
Which rolls up to verify the program outcome.
Right, which then theoretically guarantees the long-term educational objective. It forces the educator to build the entire semester backward.
But going back to my earlier point about the sheer administrative nightmare of tracking all this data, isn't this going to turn teachers into data entry clerks rather than educators?
Well, that is a huge concern, and it's exactly why modern autonomous institutions rely so heavily on enterprise software. Because asking a human being to track thousands of micro-competencies on a spreadsheet is just a recipe for a faculty revolt.
Oh, for sure.
The case study of St. Anne's College for Women provides a really great blueprint here. They rolled out an initiative called OBE 2.0.
Using tech platforms, right?
Yeah, they utilize specialized enterprise resource planning software, platforms like Colpol, Mastersoft, and Digi.
Let's visualize what that actually looks like for a teacher on a daily basis.
Okay, so a professor designs a rubric for an essay. Instead of just giving the essay an 85 out of 100, the software requires the professor to tag specific questions or rubric criteria for specific course outcomes.
So it's automated.
Yeah. When the grade is entered, the software automatically calculates how well the student achieved that specific competency, maps it to Bloom's taxonomy, and then aggregates it into a department-wide dashboard.
Okay, so if a student is constantly failing at the application level of Bloom's taxonomy across multiple classes, the software just flags it immediately.
Yes. They evaluate course attainment at the end of every single semester.
That's incredibly fast feedback.
It is. If a gap is identified, they apply corrective measures in real time rather than waiting 4 years to find out the graduate is unemployable.
Which is huge.
And this level of data tracking is actually becoming legally mandated in places like India under the National Education Policy of 2020.
Really? Legally mandated?
Yeah, you can't just claim you are teaching critical thinking to get accreditation from the National Board of Accreditation anymore.
What?
You have to provide the automated mind maps and analytics to actually prove it.
Wow. Okay, so we have this incredibly intricate, automated, data-driven machine that theoretically guarantees student capability. But I have to say, whenever I see a system that heavily relies on top-down, corporate-style surveillance of every microaction a person takes, my alarm bells start ringing.
And they should.
Because this isn't actually a brand new idea, is it?
Not at all. And this is where we have to confront the scholarly critiques and the dark side of standardization. To understand the profound risks of this system, we really need to look at David Levine's critique published in the Rethinking Schools Journal.
And the crucial context here for you listening is that this was published back in the winter of 1987.
Almost 40 years ago. He was analyzing the rollout of OBE in the Milwaukee public schools system.
Which serves as this fascinating historical stress test.
It really does. When you look at Levine's critique alongside modern platforms like 21K School pushing for OBE flexibility, you see a massive ideological collision.
And just to be perfectly clear here, exploring this isn't about us endorsing a specific political approach to school boards or taking sides.
Right, we're just impartially reporting on the sources.
Exactly. It's about looking at the blueprint of this system and finding where the structural stress fractures are most likely to happen.
Well said. So, regarding that stress fracture in Milwaukee, modern sources tout OBE as this liberating, personalized learning experience where students move at their own pace.
But Levine argued the exact opposite back in the 80s, didn't he?
He did. He called it the illusion of freedom. Administrators promised teachers that they would retain about 20% of their instructional time for creative, personalized teaching.
But the other 80%.
80% was completely mandated by strict OBE objectives.
Which effectively turns highly trained, passionate educators into semi-skilled technical workers.
Yes.
I mean, they aren't educators anymore at that point. They are just operatives executing a corporate blueprint designed by some architect in a central office.
And the curriculum just ceases to be organic. Levine detailed the fifth-grade science curriculum in his article. Under the OBE mandate, teachers were expected to teach a staggering 321 specific objectives across all subjects.
321.
And in science alone, there were 63 specific objectives, mostly involving the rapid memorization of factual knowledge.
Think about the mechanics of trying to teach 63 specific testable objectives to 10-year-olds in a single subject. You can't do inquiry-based learning.
No, you really can't.
You can't let a kid raise their hand and ask a fascinating why question that derails the lesson for 20 minutes.
You literally do not have the time. Levine actually quoted a physics professor who noted that real science is fundamentally about curiosity.
Right.
But if a teacher wants to spend a week doing a deep dive project because the kids got genuinely passionate about, say, the solar system, they can't.
Because if they do, they fail to hit the mandatory objectives for that week, and the software flags them as failing.
Exactly. The system actively punishes spontaneity.
And Levine highlighted how arbitrary these top-down mandates can be, too. Like, talk about the middle school language arts inconsistency, because I found that detail completely baffling.
Oh, yeah. So under the district's OBE framework at the time, sixth graders were mandated to write dramatic scenes and poetry.
Sounds great.
Right. But the moment those exact same students entered seventh grade, those creative objectives were completely eliminated. They were replaced by a rigid mandate to write a basic 3 to 5 paragraph composition.
I mean, who decides that poetry is a critical, measurable outcome for an 11-year-old, but somehow an irrelevant distraction for a 12-year-old?
It's a great question.
It just exposes the flaw in constructive alignment. The outcomes aren't objective truths. They are just the preferences of whoever programmed the software that year.
And that rigid programming severely limits depth. The most glaring example Levine provided was the high school urban citizenship course.
Oh, this one was wild.
It had 25 massive, sweeping objectives. Things like evaluate the accomplishments and shortcomings of the civil rights movement.
Okay.
And explain the Cold War and compare social institutions across representative world societies.
Any single one of those topics could take an entire semester to explore with the nuance it actually deserves.
Easily.
If a class wanted to investigate something highly relevant to their actual lives, say, analyzing housing policies or police relations in their own local neighborhood, they're entirely blocked from doing so.
Because exploring a localized, relevant topic means you won't have time to speed run the Cold War before the semester ends,
Right.
which leads to the ultimate trap of OBE. It's a danger that both Levine warned about in 1987, and modern critics like 21K School still warn about today. And that's curriculum alignment.
Teaching to the test.
Exactly. If you have 321 mandatory objectives, the only mathematical way to prove you achieved them is through standardized bubble sheet testing or computerized test banks.
So the assessment just completely drives the instruction.
The teacher races through a superficial checklist. The 21K School critique points out that this hyper-focus on measurable quantitative competencies fundamentally destroys out-of-the-box thinking.
Because if a student comes up with a brilliant, highly unconventional solution to a problem,
Right.
but that solution doesn't map perfectly onto the pre-written rubric in the software, it just doesn't count. The system cannot recognize a genius it wasn't programmed to look for.
It creates a severe philosophical tension. We have the corporate and administrative demand for highly measurable, verifiable skills to ensure youth employability.
Which is valid.
It is.
Yeah.
But we also have the scholarly reality that hyper-measuring every cognitive milestone creates this mechanical straitjacket that kills curiosity.
So synthesizing all of this, where does that leave a student sitting in a classroom right now?
It really leaves them relying entirely on the execution of the system. The success of outcome-based education isn't inherent. It is conditional.
Conditional on what?
On how it's implemented. When it is implemented poorly, as a heavy-handed administrative mandate, it manifests exactly as Levine feared. It consumes massive amounts of teacher time, it forces marginalized students into rigid pacing, and it devolves into a superficial exercise of checking boxes.
But when it is executed well.
When executed well, as modern software tries to facilitate, it forces continuous quality improvement.
Right, CQI.
Yes.
Yeah.
It stops the conveyor belt from pushing a student forward who hasn't actually learned how to read just because the calendar says it's June.
Right. And the argument from modern autonomous institutions is that the technology of today, the AI-driven grading, the seamless background analytics, actually solves those logistical nightmares from 1987.
That's the hope. The software absorbs the data entry burden, which theoretically gives the teacher that time back to engage personally with the students.
But the technology might only solve the logistics. It doesn't really solve the underlying philosophy, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Like, who gets to decide what an essential outcome is? Is it the corporation looking for a compliant worker? Is it the state? Or is it the local community?
It's a debate we're going to be having for a long time.
Yeah. Let's pull all these threads together. We started by looking at a system in crisis. The traditional, time-bound model of education is failing to produce graduates who can actually navigate the demands of the modern workforce.
And the shift to outcome-based education is a radical attempt to replace endurance with competence.
We are changing the currency of education from time spent to skills verified.
Exactly.
But as we explored, the infrastructure required to verify human intellect is just staggering. It requires mapping every single homework assignment to a grand, long-term career objective.
And while that guarantees a baseline of capability, it carries the profound risk of centralizing control and turning classrooms into data collection centers rather than spaces of genuine discovery. Which leaves us with a really critical question to consider as this transition accelerates globally.
What's that?
Well, if we successfully build this automated utopia, if we perfectly engineer the curriculum so that every single outcome is a measurable, trackable, highly specific competency, what happens when artificial intelligence can execute every one of those specific, measurable outcomes faster and cheaper than the human we just spent 4 years training?
Oh, wow.
Right? If we reduce a human education solely to a checklist of mechanical skills, do we accidentally build a workforce that is entirely replaceable by the very software grading them?
That is heavy.
What is the unmeasurable outcome of a human mind, and how do we protect it?
That really is the defining question for the next decade of education. We don't want to dismantle a flawed factory just to build a more efficient machine that forgets it's supposed to be teaching human beings.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this Research Union Insights deep dive. We really appreciate your time and your curiosity in exploring these complex landscapes with us.
It's been a great conversation.
We encourage you to keep diving into these topics on your own. And if you want to get in touch for collaborations or further inquiries, visit the official website at researchunion.org or follow along on Instagram at www.instagram.com/researchunion. Until next time, keep questioning the outcomes.